Good morning, everybody. I'm so glad that you've decided to join me today for our fifth episode of National Cannabis News with Cassin. Um, Today, we're going to go over the things that we've been going over. It seems that in the cannabis world, the Wild Wild West is still alive and well, and prohibitionists still want to wring our necks. So, we're going to be going over cannabis busts, what's going on in the legislature in the United States. We're going to take a deeper dive into cannabis science and what's been happening around the country and the globe to show us that cannabis is not nearly as dangerous as the prohibitionist has been telling us for the last 100 years. We're going to take another look at cannabis quality because it's important that you are aware of things that are happening to consumers across the country. And we'll also take a look at what's happening here in Michigan, in case you are here to talk about what's going on. There's also an opportunity for you to ask me anything in the chat on Twitch today. So if you have a question, I will work on getting you the answer. And if I can't get you the answer, I will find somebody who can in the next few episodes. Appreciate that you're here. Speaking of next episodes, next week will be hopefully the first week that we have our first guest on the show, and in this case, Michael Webster is going to join us and talk about how his work is bringing the cannabis community together in Michigan and around the country. So that should be an exciting opportunity to ask questions of another cannabis subject matter expert and advocate in the United States. It's good for everyone, I think. All right, so moving right into cannabis busts. Okay, so as you may have learned in previous episodes, cannabis, it may be legal where you are, but that does not mean that people are not still being arrested for its use. Does not mean that people are not still be arrested for transportation and for sale of this amazing plant. Even in states that have had legal programs for longer than many of us even care to remember, we're still seeing arrests happening on a weekly basis. And sometimes it's more often than certainly you would think of being in a legal state. So definitely take some time out to think about the people who have been bringing you this amazing plant. There's over 30,000 people who are still in prison for this plant and possession of this plant and selling of this plant across the country. Even with the pardons that we've been seeing, even with the expungements that we've been seeing in some states, it is still the case. Just last year, for instance, over 20,000 people were arrested for cannabis in this great state of Texas, right? So this is something that's still happening. And, we started out with this at the top of the hour because it's incredibly important to remember that just because you're able to consume cannabis and you can buy it at a dispensary and you can have it delivered to your house doesn't mean that people are not still suffering from the prohibitionists that continue to arrest us and imprison us across the country. All right, so what do we have? Oh my gosh, it's California again! Citizen arrested and charged with multiple cannabis felonies. Their property's been seized, including of just dozens of pounds of cannabis and cash on hand. This is just one more time where the great state of California is cracking down against traditional market operators because they want the licensed operators to have a better chance of success. But they seem to just forget that the reason the licensed cannabis operators don't have a great chance for success is not because there's traditional market operators. It's because the state has made it nearly impossible to be competitive with the existing market that had been in place for decades, for generations. And that traditional market never trusted the government to begin with. And why should they when they've been arrested and prosecuted and families have been destroyed for decades, right? And then moving over to one of the remaining 3 states without any legalization across the country. Okay, that's Idaho, Kansas, and Nebraska. For anybody who's not paying attention, Nebraska, citizen was arrested. Tens of thousands of cannabis vaping products were seized and dozens of pounds of cannabis, right? It's a little bit interesting to consider that in Nebraska, if you're going to sell illegal drugs, you still have to pay taxes, and they make you get drug tax stamps to put on said products that you are going to illegally sell. Like, I don't know anybody who does this. Like, why would you tell the state? But in this case, the person was arrested with and charged with intent to distribute and tax evasion. Only in Nebraska. or probably actually all over the country, but Nebraska is what happened this past week. In addition, in Arkansas, another legal state with an established medical program, and you would think that perhaps local law enforcement would be more friendly to that, but no. In this case, 4 separate arrests seizing over 400 pounds of cannabis on one individual day. All of the citizens were from out of state and were maybe just driving through. Perhaps it was just a flyover state, but they weren't flying, they were driving. This is something that for me is always a worry for anybody who's like, oh, well, yeah, I can go on vacation. I can drive wherever I want. Oh, really? Out of state plates? Even in-state plates. They're looking at you and they want to arrest you. They want to seize your stuff. I'm not entirely sure why they want to do this, but they've been doing it for generations, so why would they stop now? Moving from the south up to the north, New York City is really cracking down on citizens who are selling cannabis in an unlicensed way. Big bust was made in Brooklyn, and the local police got out in force to say this is the kind of bust that's making our children unsafe. I'm not entirely sure I agree that children were made unsafe because somebody didn't purchase a license, but perhaps that's the case. In this case, this shop appeared to be supplementing many other shops throughout New York City. And they believe that because it's been shut down and all of its employees have been arrested and charged, that this crackdown will lead to less unlicensed cannabis throughout the city. I'm not entirely sure I agree. We haven't seen that happen in Michigan. We haven't seen that happen in California. But perhaps New York thinks that they've got, the perfect map on how to prevent people who have been selling cannabis for generations in the great city of New York to stop doing what they're doing and only do it if they're in a licensed facility where they have to pay taxes and jump through hoops. It's also worth noting that because they have limited licensing in the great state of New York, not everybody who wants to play is allowed to play. So of course there's going to be players who are going to not play by the rules. Again, looking at you, California, you did this to yourself. If you would have made it easier to get in and not charge as much in taxes, you might, maybe, be doing a little bit better today than you are. But who knows? That's just one more reason to think about what these cannabis busts really mean. These legalization activities, started with making sure people had access to medicine. And in general, a lot of people, even if they aren't talking to their doctors, are using cannabis to self-medicate. Whether they're using it to take the edge off their anxiety, or their edge off their back pain, or they're using it to be able to enjoy themselves in an extroverted environment when they're an introvert. There are so many reasons people use cannabis on any given day, and acting as though somehow, even with the traditional market having been around for generations, that people are going to be happy to do what the government is telling them, when for generations the government has lied to us about the dangers of cannabis. I just don't think it's going to happen that way. And maybe it will, but maybe it won't happen in my lifetime. Who knows? All right, so moving along from that, let's talk a little bit more about what those prohibitionists are trying to do still today. In the legislature, the House GOP voted to maintain protections for medical states, which was great. Made it out of committee. However, they also decided that they're going to expand limitations on where licensed medical facilities can be located. Just one more way for prohibitionists to say that our product, that this sacred plant, doesn't deserve to be around normal people, as though cannabis users aren't normal people. And in this case, the limiting areas are really broad, No cannabis can be sold around schools. Okay, we have drug-free zones. But now, all libraries, all parks, all public meeting areas, including all churches. Well, what about churches that are focused on cannabis? Did they ever consider that? Or are they so out of touch with reality of the world that they don't even recognize the spiritual nature of the plant and how it's impacting people across the country in this way and around the world? It's a little bit crazy to me that while we're in the middle of a rescheduling conversation with the DEA, which, by the way, you now have just 10 days left to submit your public comment. 10 days, people. Get on it. Be submitting it. Your voice matters, right? that the committee also voted with the GOP to remove the ability of the DEA, the group responsible for scheduling in the United States, from being able to deschedule or reschedule cannabis. Wow. Of all drugs, the DEA is not allowed to do anything at all with cannabis. It makes really no sense at all, except for they're basically saying, hey, executive branch, we know we have given you the power to do this for the last 50 years, but you haven't done it correctly, so we don't want to have that power anymore. And in this case, it's because you're trying to give people more freedom instead of less. Seems like a totally normal thing for the GOP to be interested in doing. I always feel like they're trying to take away my liberties as a queer citizen of the United States, but I could just be, having a little trauma about prior life experiences where just being myself was illegal in the 90s, and I've only been able to be married to my spouse for not even 10 years, according to these new laws. Right? So it's a crazy world we live in. Again, you guys, it's just 10 days left for you to be able to submit public comments on rescheduling. Over 28,000 people have already done this. This is an opportunity for you to let people know, do you think rescheduling is good? Do you think descheduling is where we need to go? Do you not want to see any change at all to the way cannabis rules exist? Your voice matters. If you're not using it, they're not going to know. They're required to receive all these public comments and respond to them and take them into consideration when they're making their decisions. So what you have to say matters. And even if what you have to say is exactly what another 5,000 people had to say, that voice just got louder because you added your voice to it. Don't let your voice go unheard. It's important. And when I say it's important, I really mean it. Because how many times have you been in a place where someone was like, oh, you're using cannabis, and they looked at you funny? Or you were talking about how you were having a really good weekend, and they assumed that you were getting drunk, but really you just had a nice cannabis beverage and played some video games, right? Until we can remove this stigma, until we can all talk honestly about what's happening with this plant, and how the government has lied to us for all this time, and how because they've lied to us for all this time, we're so behind on the scientific frontiers, especially compared to our peers around the world. Until we can do that, they're winning. We need to work together to remove this stigma. That's why I do this show every week, bringing to you the news, reminding you that people are still going to prison, reminding you that even if you can buy cannabis and have it shipped to your door today, where you live, that your neighbor who might be growing plants and selling plants to his friends and family might be at risk of prosecution, may be arrested just next week. We might be talking about him on this show. And that's not okay. And until we all work together to make that different, we're still going to have people who are being irreparably harmed by the prohibitionist mindset around this plant. All right, so moving away from the idea of prohibition and on to cannabis science. I know everybody loves science, and if you don't, well, you might be in the wrong place, but that's okay. The broader thing here is that there are so many new ways to get cannabinoids. And I know it sounds crazy, but you don't have to get them from the plant. They do exist in other plants. They do exist naturally in our bodies. Our bodies make these substances. Isn't that crazy? We have substances that are made in our bodies that are illegal for us to consume from outside of our body. I know, it's crazy. But, prohibitionists don't really care about science. So if we look at that, now there are plenty of new non-plant sources, including cannabinoids that are being made by yeasts. So in this case, the yeasts are genetically modified so that they have the same internal synthesizers as the cannabis plant would have. Then you feed them the precursors, just like you would for a normal cannabis plant, and they start producing these cannabinoids just like the plant does, but in a faster way, because yeasts, they do things a lot faster, and you can strip the yeast out a little bit faster than you can by waiting, 8 to 12 weeks for the cannabis plant to get mature. I think it's exciting to see how the science is moving there. This science started in California. There's a lot of interesting things that are always happening there in the Bay Area. And I'm always excited to see that people are thinking about cannabinoids in a different way. So in this case, now they're thinking about fully functionalized cannabinoids, taking the ones that already exist and modifying them a little bit so that then those can then be tested in clinical trials against others to say, hey, are these more effective at inflammation? Are these more effective at, suppressing appetite? For this, we're probably not talking about, hey, cannabinoids that you're going to be able to consume in gummies anytime soon. But we are talking about cannabinoids that may be going into new drug and investigational drug clinical trials here in the next, 5 to 10 years. And that could mean really improving quality of life through chemistry, and in this case, biochemistry, for people across the country. And I'm excited about that because that's something that's happening with our plant in our industry, where they have said, hey, this plant is doing such amazing things. Let's take its DNA and put it into another molecule and take those molecules and put it into another organism and see if we can do it faster and cheaper. And that means more access for more consumers through cannabis science, right? Cannabis science today for a better tomorrow, and I am loving it. I know last week I mentioned this, but have you been thinking about how amazing it is that cannabis helps diabetics? Because I have. I cannot tell you how amazing it is to come across science where it's like one of the largest problems we have in the United States is diabetes, and cannabis is being shown to help people with diabetes. From reducing the inflammation, to assisting with nerve pain, to being able to reverse the different effects that it's having, to having insulin production be more regulated. Wow, I am so excited. I cannot wait to see what the Colorado University in Boulder continues to do with this research. And the fact that they've already been able to do it and find these statistical differences in cannabis users and non-cannabis users with this disease, to me, is just groundbreaking. And I am so glad to share that with you. This is one more reason why we need to loosen the reins, right? We can't hold on so tightly. The tighter we hold, the less good science can be done. And we won't be able to find how the sacred plant has been helping us for generations and then make it more available for the masses. Is it strain specific? Is it cannabinoid specific? Is it dosage specific? We don't know because it's been prohibited. And we can find out soon if we take the hands off the reins, if we take the foot off the brake, and we don't even have to push on the gas, we can just take the foot off the brake. And we'll see what all the people who have been trying to do this work for so long have known forever. That this plant came up with us as a species in parallel, creating. Why do we have an endocannabinoid system if it's not to consume cannabinoids? It's like in a major organ in our bodies, right? Like it touches every single one of our organs, right? It's across all of our systems. And yet we want to say, hey, we shouldn't be able to have it because sometimes it gets you high. And I'll tell you what, I always thought to myself, wow, this is a little bit crazy because somehow we evolved to make sure that we had these keys in our body that this plant can fit into. And then we evolved to where people said, don't use those keys. And that just, it's just mind-boggling for me. And one of the things that people have said for a long time about why we shouldn't be using cannabis has to do with pregnancy, pregnant women, and how babies are impacted by this. New research out of Washington University in St. Louis is really showing that, hey, there are differences. They've got a group of 12,000 children that they've been following since birth. These kiddos are just now getting into where they're starting to become teenagers. And about 5% of the kiddos that are in this study had moms that consumed cannabis, or either in the very, very beginning part of pregnancy before they knew they were pregnant, or even after they knew they were pregnant for the duration of pregnancy. And so they're being able to actually track the differences in those youth as compared to everyone else. So far, they have noticed that their inflammation in the brains of these kiddos is different than the inflammation in the brains of other kiddos that are outside of the cannabis consuming cohort. They don't know what this inflammation does. They're speculating right now that it might have some changes into how the nerves are pruned in our brains as they're growing and expanding and learning. But they're going to continue watching this. Now, this is a long-term study. So we're talking about, probably another 15 to 20 years before we really know hey, what was happening and how were these kids going to be different than all the other kids, and did they have better successful outcomes, and do they have more issues or do they have less issues? So we shall see, and we'll find out. But every 5 years or so they publish to say, hey, this is what we've seen. Every 5 years ago, the kids undergo MRI and get their brain scanned so that we can have a better idea of what's physically happening inside. And that's the kind of study that we need. Now, could we have been doing this study all along? Could we do this study on a broader stance? I think so, if we remove the stigma. Because how many times are we looking and saying, okay, these moms are 100% self-reporting accurately their cannabis usage during pregnancy? What if the actual rate here is 10%, not 5%, right? Because that would be closer to national norms, right? Or even higher in some states, right? So I worry that somehow the data will be diluted because of the stigma, but all we can do is keep expanding the science, talking about things openly and honestly like we're doing right now, and allowing mothers to know that they have choices and being honest with them. There's been so much out there that's just like, you shouldn't do this because it's going to cause birth defects and death of your baby. As though a lot of medications that we already give mothers don't do the same exact thing. So, if you're a mom and you're feeling like, hey, I need to self-medicate for this nausea, or I need to self-medicate for this pain, and you're not being able to have that conversation with your doctor, you should think about, is your doctor the right doctor for you? Because maybe they're not. And that's not okay. And we definitely want to make sure that in all cases, you're able to do the things that you need to do and have those good conversations with your doctor, including talking about this, where, hey, so far they haven't seen any big changes. The difference so far has been some inflammation in the brain. They didn't see anything different really in the first 5 years, in the first 10 years, and now they're getting on to, the first 15 years, and they're noticing these changes in inflammation in the brain. Again, sometimes inflammation is good, sometimes inflammation is bad, but we don't really know yet, right? It's a good opportunity for us to talk about that. Speaking about moms and dads, there's a new study out of Georgetown that has shown that cannabis legalization has led to a stark decline in domestic violence. Now, to me, this is just really basic. If you have cheap, easy access to cannabis, you're probably going to consume that if you need to self-medicate. And you might not be consuming alcohol. And we all know that alcohol makes people violent, especially against their partners. So, here's a study that shows that when legalization happens, there's a dramatic decrease in domestic violence. And yet, the prohibitionists continue to say crazy things like, oh, smoking cannabis makes you crazy and violent, when we all know it's actually exactly the opposite of that. But prohibitionists don't want to look at reality, right? They're making up their own reality as they go along. In this case, now we have data to show that what they've been saying for generations is actually wrong. It's the opposite. That cannabis is reducing domestic violence across all of the legalized states across the country. And this is amazing. The data they use for this is the FBI database, which covers all arrests and crimes across the country. So you can really look and you can say, hey, here's a snapshot in time, and here's what I'm going to look at. I'm going to look at this specific crime. Did legalization change this, and what does it look like? And if you can see a linear relationship, which is what they've seen in this case, I mean, that's pretty stark. That means as people started consuming more cannabis because it was more readily available with potentially less stigma, less people were beating up their partners. Less people were emotionally abusing their partners. Less people were harming their kids. Now, that's a big deal. It almost is big enough that I want to say, hey, prohibitionists, perhaps a little more legalization so we'll have less partner beating and less child beating happening across the country. I mean, if we could replace alcohol, even a little bit of it, which we've already seen across legalized states, wouldn't that be good for everyone? Except for maybe the people who were selling alcohol? Wouldn't it be good if we had less people who were publicly drunk? Wouldn't it be good if they weren't driving drunk? Wouldn't it be good if they were less violent? Wouldn't it be good if they were less disorderly? Because you don't really see a bunch of stoners that are any of those things. So, I feel like that's some really amazing cannabis science. I don't know how you guys feel about it. I'd love to see some comments. Have you experienced, hey, my partner was drinking all the time and now they're smoking weed all the time, and thank goodness, because now I'm not getting beat up anymore. Now they're not trying to control my life in the same way anymore. Now they're not hurting my kids in the same way anymore. I feel like that's a pretty important thing. As a prior recipient of domestic violence, if I could have taken the beer out of their hand, I would have. But I couldn't. Not without risking my life. And if I would have known that I could hand them a joint instead, and if I would have had access to it, which I didn't because of prohibition in the state where I live, I would have. And it might have meant that I wouldn't have gotten beaten up. And that might have been really good. That might have reduced my trauma. It might have reduced my stress. Might have made it so that I could be a better student. Might have continued to stay in graduate school and maybe finish my PhD instead of leaving so that I could escape and not have to be abused. That's possible. Hey, good morning, Yessie. So glad to see you today. We were just finishing up talking about cannabis science, and I was sharing this great new study out of Georgetown, which shows that from legalization of cannabis and an increased usage of cannabis, it has a linear relationship with reduction of domestic violence in legalized states. And it's huge and stark, which I think we have all realized by now, as I was saying, that when you're high from cannabis, it's not like being drunk from alcohol, and you're not trying to swing at people and you don't get all angry and want to harm people. Like, maybe you want to have a good time, or maybe you want to go take a nap, but you're not like, hey, let me go punch a bunch of folks, which is funny since for decades, for generations, the prohibitionists have been saying quite the opposite. All right, so let's talk about cannabis quality as well. Guys, I know we've talked about this last week and the week before and the week before that, but like really, it's important. Another recall is happening in California right now. If you are in California and you are consuming cannabis, make sure you are paying attention. There are pesticides in your cannabis products that can be causing harm. I don't want you to get harmed. Look at what you're consuming, consider what it is, see if it's part of this recall, see if it's part of the same brands from this recall, even if it's not specifically part of this recall, and consider whether or not it's safe enough for you to consume. It's not good for you to be inhaling pesticides. It's not good for you to be eating pesticides. And in this case, the pesticides are well over the limit that would be legally allowed, which, was already a pretty low limit, but still, much higher than you would usually have in food, for instance. So let's make sure everybody's safe. Beyond that, and a little bit adjacent but outside of normal cannabis, the FDA continues recalling adaptogen mushroom-infused chocolates and gummies. At this point, we have more than one death from these products, everybody. Like, this is important. You're getting these products, you're ordering them on Facebook, they're coming drop shipped to your door, and you're consuming them, and you could end up in the hospital, and some people are dying from this. So if you are buying these products, you're thinking about buying these products, you have these products in your home already, please go look at the FDA's website. Just say FDA recall mushrooms. It'll be very clear to you. It'll pop up. It'll show you images of what these products look like. So you can say, hey, oh, wow, that is the brand that I'm using right now, and acknowledge that you shouldn't be consuming them because you could end up in the hospital. We don't want you having seizures. We don't want you to have brain damage from these products. That's never the intent when you're a consumer consuming these products, and that's what's happening right now. So take a look at it. Look at your package. See it. It's very clear. The FDA website has photos of all of the products, the names of the products, the manufacturers, where they came from, the websites that they came from on their website. You can go, you can look at it today. They're kind of great about this. They try to make it really easy for people to figure out, hey, does this impact me or not? And even if this specific one doesn't impact you, consider that these new products do not have the same safety protocols as other consumer packaged goods. So start slow and pay attention to your body, okay? Start slow and pay attention to your body. And if you are like, what does that even mean? Just don't do it, okay? Because at this point, if you could die from consuming some correctly, if you don't know how to consume and you don't know how to not to overindulge, right? I don't want you to end up in the hospital. I don't want you to have a bad experience with these products. That's not the intent here. We want consumers to be safe. We want families to be safe, right? And remember, with all of these things, don't decide that today what you're going to do is just throw it away in a trash can that your animal could have access to, because animals love eating chocolate I know it sounds crazy, especially chocolate, since it's bad for most animals, right? You don't want to dispose of it in a place where kids could have access to it either. So, there are safe ways to do it, double bagging, those kinds of things, putting it in locked containers before you throw it away, putting it in a sharps container before you throw it away, going and putting it into a drug drop at the local police station, right, where you're allowed to put, substances that need special handling because they're hazardous. I mean, there are lots of things that you can do to make sure that this doesn't end up in an animal or a kid accidentally because you were disposing of it. All right. I know we've talked about this before, but ASTM International is actually working on standards for these products right now, for how things should be tested for pesticides, for what kind of additives can be put together, for how you can mix cannabinoids and other things like mushroom adaptogens together in a safe way. ASTM International has been doing this now for 7 years for the cannabis industry. It's a big deal. Your voice is important. If you are a consumer of these substances and you care about your own safety and the safety of others around you, and you feel that bodhicitta coming up inside of you, that you want to have that compassion for others and go to take the next step, come participate. We need more consumers to be participating in this process and talking about what's important to you. I can say, hey, this is the information I think should be on a label, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's what you think should be on a label. I can say, hey, I think a label should have testing information on it and an address and phone number of where the stuff came from. And you could be like, hey, actually, I just want a QR code that maybe takes you to a website that does the same thing, right? Or you could be like, hey, no, I actually want to know, is it organic? Is it gluten-free? Is it kosher? All these other things that I'm not thinking about right now, but maybe you are. So your voices matters. If you're not coming and sharing those voices, then the voluntary consensus standards that we're making at the international level might not include your diversity of thought. So please consider coming and joining. It's very easy to join. It's easy to participate. We meet once every 6 months around the nation, sometimes around the world. We'll be meeting in Houston in January, and then in next June we'll be meeting in Canada. So, there's plenty of opportunities here for you to come participate and just see what we're doing. It doesn't cost you anything to do that. And then if you decide you really like doing what you're doing with us, it's very easy. It's like $100. You get in, and now you can vote, and your vote then matters and sways the opinions. And every vote matters. If we don't get to consensus, then we all have to agree that the person who doesn't agree with us is scientifically wrong. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but that's what it means to have voluntary consensus standards, that we all agree that these standards are appropriate for us to work under. All right. So that is what I like to think of as important duty, right? As a consumer, as someone who advocates for everybody else's safety. That's why I participate. I show up because I want to make sure that my voice, which I think is similar to other queer voices, other ASD voices, other caregivers in the world, right, that may not be represented at these conversations, right? So here's an invitation for you to come join the table, right? If you want to reach out, if you're thinking, hey, I want to do this, but you don't really know how, reach out, right? Contact me. You can contact me on Twitch. You can contact me on YouTube. You can contact me on LinkedIn. It's not hard for you to get a hold of me, and then I will take you with me the next time we go. Do not think that I am kidding here. I have done this many times over the last 5 years, and I would be happy to continue extending that olive branch to people who want to be involved in their own safety and in the future of the industry through voluntary consensus standards. All right. Speaking of voluntary consensus standards, okay, what is going on in Michigan? All right. So Michigan has decided to ban MCT oil from going in all vaping products. This ban takes effect on October 1st. Now, I'm a little freaked out by the fact that they know that products have this in it and they haven't recalled them. On the flip side of that, I am glad that they are doing something and they're creating new standards. This makes us now the 5th state to have decided that this kind of additive is inappropriate to go in these products. And I think that's also in parallel with what ASTM International is doing with the D37 Committee on Cannabis, because we've actually just voted on risk assessment tools for deciding what kind of products and ingredients and materials can go into vaping products, right? So we've been thinking about this for years, and now here's one more instance, just like we had with vitamin E acetate not too long ago, right? where, hey, here's a product, we're pretty sure this isn't safe, and you guys need to stop putting it in vape products. And we're going to start testing for it to make sure that you're not doing it. That's important to me. I think it's probably important to you. Something that I thought was really interesting was the first time I've heard a regulatory agency say that the industry was going to self-regulate to get these products out before the ban took effect. Meaning that people were going to do their testing, even though it's not required, right? And they were going to stop buying products that had it in there. And just knowing that the substance was going to be banned soon was going to make people stop using it today. Now, I thought that was really interesting because what I heard was, oh, it's banned in October. I got to do as much as I can right now. I got to sell as much of what I've already made right now. Because I am like, hey, why were these people doing it to begin with, right? They were doing it to make the product a little better in their minds, to make the product a little cheaper in their minds, to make the product a little more efficient in their minds, right? That mentality doesn't go away instantly, right? We have to force it away, right? Because if they were going to self-regulate to begin with, they wouldn't have done it in the first place. They would have been like, hey, the FDA has never approved MCT oil for vaporization or aerosolization for inhalation. Ever. Maybe I shouldn't use this product to go in people's lungs. Now, the same could be said for all cannabinoids, right? Though I think we've all agreed that the science for those, just hasn't been done because of prohibition. That's not the case for MCT oil, right? Like, it's not been illegal. People could have used it, but they chose not to because there are other things that people have already said are safe. So why are people doing that? All right, so other news here in Michigan. If you have not been paying attention and you care about Michigan, they are trying to merge the MMFLA for the medical program and the MRTMA for the adult use program here in Michigan. The bill to do this merge has already been submitted, so you can go and read this. It's like 60 pages long, and you can say, hey, do you like the way it's reading or do you not? I've already provided my feedback and comments to the legislature and the legislative aides that are responsible for this bill. I think that there are plenty of good things in it, but there's also a lot of stuff that just made me say, wow, why can we not get out of this prohibitionist mindset? It's like a never-ending battle between the sacred plant helping people through self-medication and all the people who think that it's somehow going to accidentally or on purpose kill adults and children in our community. I still don't understand why they feel that way, but I'm being told this on a semi-regular basis that as a drug trafficker, I am putting our community's safety at risk when we just had a study that said in reality the plant is reducing violence in our communities. But again, reality is not necessarily where the prohibitionists are landing, right? So we have to really consider for ourselves, how do we feel about the plant? Because there are other risks associated with it. People are still being arrested across the country for the plant, right? Whether you're a traditional market operator who's been providing for your family using this plant for, generations in some cases, or you just happen to be driving from one state to another and you pass through a state that has enforcement that is going to treat you differently, or, you're flying from one place to another and you're experiencing that same kind of prohibition, or you're a licensed legal operator and you drive and you come across a federal agent who is there for other reasons, but they then decide that they're going to detain you and seize all of your stuff. We're seeing across the country right now, including in Michigan, civil seizures and civil asset forfeiture, which is really where the police come in and say, oh, well, you're committing a crime, and because I said you're committing a crime, I can take all your stuff. So we're definitely still seeing that. And so, be aware that, just because it feels different today doesn't mean that it's all that we're finished yet. The battle is still ongoing. We still have to reduce the stigma enough so that nobody is like, oh yeah, cannabis is so dangerous, it's so bad, we got to make sure that nobody has access to it anymore. No, we really have to work against that. And we work against that by working together, by following the rules, by self-regulating, right? And, it may be an act of civil disobedience to not follow all of the rules, but we acknowledge that civil disobedience, right, is still against the rules and can land you in prison, just like we were talking about at the top of the hour, right? There's a lot of unfriendliness in the enforcement community, especially when you consider just how much they're seizing from us in that civil asset forfeiture. It's a lot. And that's money that they've been using to fund all kinds of enforcement actions for generations, right? So don't forget about those kinds of things, and try to remember as well that there are still people that are serving time for this plant that you now have ready access from all across the country. In almost every state. Only 3 states don't have any license programs, and those states already have the traditional market, right? Those people are just at more risk than all of the other states. So, all right, so we've come to the part of this chat that is about asking me anything. Do we have any questions from the viewers? I'm looking. I don't see any questions in the chat. We'll give people an opportunity. This Ask Me Anything is really here for you. Ask me about science, ask me about quality, ask me about cannabis law. You know, if you're like, hey, I want to know what kind of cat you have because you have a cat cam, but there are never any cats, or these imaginary cats. No, really, they exist. I just, you know, maybe 10 o'clock in the morning is not a good time for them. Perhaps they're like lounging in their cat tree or something. Because they do exist. I promise. There's 2 of them. Right. So, you know, if you, any kind of question that you really are considering to ask, I'm here. You know, coming up, you know, this next week, Michael Webster's going to be joining us. The week after that, I hope that we'll be talking to Maddie Grant about science. You know, she actually said she could be here today. But I wasn't ready. I know it's crazy, right? Like I need to learn more about bringing the news and streaming before I just do that. So hopefully we'll get that stuff squared away next week and be able to bring on more people. And then Connie Sparrow is going to come talk to us hopefully the week after that. And that should be like literally we will be up at the Michigan Cannabis Industry Association summer extravaganza that happens up at Torch Lake every year. You know, meeting as a community, networking, talking about the issues, working together, looking at different businesses, and hopefully Connie will be there and be able to come on live with the stream while we're there. So it'll be the first time I'll be streaming remotely. I'm excited and scared about how that's going to work, but we're going to do it, and we'll see how that goes. It would be a good opportunity to talk about, you know, how the landscape of tourism and vacations have changed across the country with different types of legalization and what that looks like. Connie has said that she is willing to talk to us about that, and I am so excited to hear more about this. You know, I don't do these things now, right? Because, you know, if I can't take my wife somewhere where she can have access to medicine, then we're just not going, right? Like that's just the truth. And there's so many places that you know, that won't work. But yeah, thank you, Yessie. I think we can do it too. I'm so excited to make it happen. And you know, so we'll be live streaming from Torch Lake in 3 Fridays. Which, woo, how exciting is that? And hopefully everybody will think that that's grand and it will work well. And then we're continuing to put out a call to Robin Schneider saying, hey, we know that you are busy, but would you please come talk to us about what's happening with all of the companies that you support and the legislature and how we can contribute here in the state of Michigan. We know that your voice is important, and we are so glad that you're here fighting for all of us. Okay, so I'm still not seeing any questions coming in the chat. So, you know, I think we're going to probably close out the Ask Me Anything and talk about, hey, please, guys, remember, take some time and just keep it in your thoughts, keep it in your prayers, keep it in your meditation practice. When we are talking about having access to this plant, when you go and you sit down and you're like really getting ready to enjoy a bowl, when you're getting ready to consume that edible, right? Take some time, right? To thank all those who came before and all those currently doing the work to bring that to you today. All those people still in prison, all those cannabis workers, you know, sludging along with these plants out in the sun, in greenhouses, you know, working with them in indoor grow facilities, right? Like, think about that. Think about the sun that is taking it. Think about the earth that it is, all the work that happened in it. And really take that in and then send back that, hey, you were glad that it's here. You're glad that you have access and that you hope that we get better access in the future. And that all those people that contributed in making sure that they had access to it, and all those people who came before who've had their freedom taken away, will have a little bit of peace. Will be able to enjoy just a little bit of the joy that you're going to be getting from that today. All right. Thank you guys for joining me today. This is a great episode number 5. Look forward to see you guys for episode number 6 next week when we're here with Michael Webster. And have a really great week. All right. Bye.